My name's Jane McKay, and I brought primarily a wicker woven, very intricately woven basket made by Polish soldiers during the war in my mom's home in Scotland, which was called Montrave House. She brought it from Scotland when she moved here in 1946, landed at Pier 21 with my older sister.
We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. The British Prime Minister, Sir Winston Churchill, famously rallied the spirits of his nation with those words. During the Second World War, Great Britain stood strong against Nazi Germany. Successfully defending Britain against German invasion was key to the Allied victory. Its naval bases and its airfields served as the launch points for the D-Day invasion of Normandy, the turning point of the war in Europe. Throughout the war, England and Scotland hosted camps for Commonwealth soldiers as they embarked for battle, and hospitals that treated the hundreds of thousands of servicemen who returned wounded.
So James, what do we have here today?
It's a woven grass basket made by soldiers that were patients in the convalescent hospital in Montrave, which was my mom's home in Scotland, that had been converted to a convalescent hospital during the war. It's in Fife in Scotland, which is just north of the Firth of Forth and west of St. Andrews, so Cooper would be the closest town.
It's very detailed and it's very ornamental, particularly with almost the rope-like work around.
Yes, according to my mom, who was volunteering to nurse there, so they would go out on the estate, obviously, get fresh air and exercise and things, but pick the grasses, dry it, and were able to weave these baskets, some artisan skill that they brought with them from Poland.
And obviously made during the wartime, it's a fine example of trench art. Trench art is something created by a soldier, sailor, or airman in their downtime. It can be a sculpture, it can be a carving, it can be something created from materials that are around. And in this case, the materials were the long grasses of the Scottish Highlands. About 2,500 Polish military people married Scottish women. Part, and obviously Montrave played a role in that. Maybe we can get some sense of how it was started and a bit about your family as well.
My grandfather was the Secretary of State for Scotland, and at the time that Montrave was converted, he was the Minister of Shipping. My grandmother had served in World War I in Salonique, VAD, they call it, Voluntary Aid Division, Red Cross trained. And I think they felt like they wanted to do something to contribute to the war effort. So they offered the house to the government and said, would this work as a hospital? And they went through the process. I have the paperwork that was going back and forth about that from the health department and whatnot. We have a letter from Winston Churchill, who my grandfather was in cabinet with, thanking them for offering Montrave as a hospital, and started as a hospital in 1942.
Montrave, I think, is a perfect example of what happened in the United Kingdom between 1939 and 45. A number of large facilities, country homes, stately parks, were all repurposed for the wartime effort. This particular home was repurposed to provide a support to injured and wounded soldiers in the middle of rural Scotland. Obviously, a major player in this story is your mother. Maybe you can give us a sense of her story.
She was born in 1922, so at the beginning of the war she was less than 20. So she grew up living at Montrave House till she was 10 or 11 with a governess and went off to boarding school. And then she was in Paris at the beginning of the war. Received a telegram from my grandfather, which was a pre-agreed on code if something went wrong. She got the telegram saying Aunt Ma's seriously ill, return home immediately, and went back to Scotland. One family story my mom used to tell would be loading all the paintings and taking it up to another building to store them. And it was up further on the hill so they could get a view out over the Firth of Forth from there. And she saw the first German air raid on shipping in the Firth of Forth.
When the soldiers and the airmen and sailors arrived in 1942, was she actually engaged with them? What was her role?
So my mom worked as what we would call a nursing assistant these days. They had, I think, 1,600 patients or something through there during the time that it operated as a hospital. It had about 52 beds, so it was, a fair-sized operation.
So she obviously was introduced to the soldiers, and there was a large contingent of Polish armed forces there as well?
Yes, Yeah, she became fluent in Polish.
Right.
She spent 3 years probably working in this hospital with these soldiers. The Polish army and individuals certainly expressed heartfelt gratitude. I mean, they made things like this and gave it to the family, but also as an oil painting of my mother and a calligraphy piece that was wishes for their wedding, and several letters from, I think, 3 different Polish generals. My father went to the UK in 1938 and joined the RAF and was stationed at Lucas, which is just outside St. Andrews, which is quite close by. So his story about how they connected, my mother and my father, was his squadron leaders came to him one day and said, we're invited to Montreuil to a shoot, which meant they'd be shooting pheasants or quail, you know, people beating. You've seen those things in movies and books. And so off they go to Montreuil to this shoot. And my mother was in the group of people that were beating, like walking through the field, getting the birds to fly toward the people with the guns. And she was on the other side of a hedge. My father fired at a bird and she was nearly missed. So she came storming through the hedge saying, what do you think you're doing here? Almost shot me. And according to her, the rest is history. But
The Polish contribution to the British Armed Forces was significant. And a large number of Polish airmen escaped through the various ports. 16 squadrons were created that were mainly Polish, operated and flown in. And the majority of those squadrons were active throughout from 1940 right through to the end of the war. Most of them were fighter squadrons, a number were bomber squadrons, and also Coastal Command anti-submarine work. 145 Polish airmen flew in the Battle of Britain. And interesting statistic is that Polish airmen were about 5%, but they had 12% of the kills. This is a fantastic artifact of a time that's now, 80 years ago. I think obviously it needs to be shared with a larger audience. So what is its future? What do you see becoming of this?
I've been talking to the Polish consulate here. I'm thinking I'm going to talk to the embassy in Ottawa. There's a Polish society actually as they're displaying meat, whatever, in a church in North End, Dartmouth. So before it goes somewhere else, maybe it should be just shown to them if they have a meeting or something.
The story that Jane told today was one of a family at war. It's part of Jane's personal history, but those personal histories become a bigger part of World War II.